Good afternoon and welcome to the Monday, February 5th Planning Advisory Committee meeting. Roll call. Welcome. This meeting is now called to order and roll has been taken. Rules of procedure. So this meeting is held in a hybrid format in accordance with Article 18 of the city's procedure bylaw. Staff and delegates participating virtually are reminded to keep their video and microphones off until requested by the chair or members of the committee. All cameras for virtual committee members must remain on to ensure quorum. All members of the committee will vote by physical show of hands. Please leave your hand raised until the chair has determined the result of the vote. In the event of a connection or service disruption occurs that affects quorum, we may recess the meeting for up to 15 minutes to regain quorum. If quorum is not achieved, the meeting will be adjourned. Declarations of conflict of interest. Members of the committee, do any of you have any declarations of conflicts of pecuniary interest to make on any of the items before the committee? Seeing none, we're moving on. Presentations and delegations. There is one presentation on the agenda for today's meeting. As the presentation today encompasses a lot of material, with no objection, I would suggest we waive section 15.6.3, presentations of the city's procedural bylaw, which limits presentations to 10 minutes, and section 15.8.6, which requires members to wait until the debate of the item to ask questions of the presenter and staff in order to allow for greater discussion with the consultant. Any objections, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, moving on then. I'd like to ask Joshua Schramm to come forward and provide presentation on item 4.1, new zoning bylaw project, draft zoning bylaw. Paul Lowe's from SLG will also be present to answer any questions from the committee. Josh?
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Thanks for having the project team here. My name is Joshua Schramm. I'm a senior long-range planner with the city of Brantford and the project lead on the city's zoning bylaw. Really excited to be here to chat with you today. We've been advancing a really important document, over 30 years old. The city of Brantford, this zoning bylaw, the new draft zoning bylaw, is a great opportunity to streamline our development processes in a clear and concise way with a new document, with a new look, and I'm really excited to be here. Also, online with us is Paul Lowe's from SGL Planning. Paul is the lead consultant on the project, and towards the end, Paul will be assisting with some of the questions. So with that being said, we'll get underway. Help me here navigate the presentation, so thank you. So just as an overview, the city of Brantford's new zoning bylaw is focused on establishing a new zoning bylaw that will regulate all lands within the city of Brantford, and this also includes the former county lands that were annexed to the city in 2017. It'll implement the city's new official plan and provide specific direction about what can occur on a property. For example, what uses are allowed, the height and size of buildings, parking, landscape requirements. And so on this slide, I just wanted to recap that the project includes several phases. In the previous phase, the strategic directions report utilized the discussion papers and findings from public consultation activities to really set out the structure for the new zoning bylaw. So we're now at phase 5, and what we've done here is we've used the strategic directions report really as a blueprint and drafted a comprehensive zoning bylaw, which was released for public review on December 4th of last year. And that consultation period really ended last week. And we're still receiving tons of comments over the weekend, received lots of good feedback, and setting up several meetings with different agencies and stakeholder groups. So the conversation's still going, and we're really appreciative of all the feedback we've received. So Lisa, if you can just help me toggle that'd be helpful. This one will work. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. So in terms of looking at this new bylaw, looking at the document, kind of understanding its origins, the draft zoning bylaw outlines how land is regulated, as I mentioned, and it's really in conformity with the land use designation set out in the city's official plan. And I have a few slides later where we'll look at some of the mapping and compare it, right? We'll compare the Schedule A of the city's zoning bylaw and compare it to our land use Schedule 3 of the city's official plan. You'll see some of the origins for how that structure kind of came to be. As I mentioned, the zoning bylaw establishes various zones and determines how land can be used within those zones. So including things like the permitted uses, where buildings and structures can be located on property. It regulates aspects of development like height and size of yards, front, side, and rear yard setbacks, and again, parking and landscaping. Although we can talk about all the great things that this document can and will do as we advance, I also want to talk about things that are not regulated by the zoning bylaw. So we're talking about the internal design of buildings, the design of streetscapes, parks, and public spaces, and things such as construction techniques for how buildings are really constructed as well. So this is the part that I really like to chat about, is our new structure. The new structure for the zoning bylaw, we're talking about a document, as I mentioned, that's over 30 years old. So it's a unique comparison when we're looking at the previous bylaw 160-90, and we're looking at this new zoning bylaw. We can really see a more modern approach. And one of the things I kind of want to zone in on is sections 1 and 2. When we're talking about the zoning bylaw and we're talking about this new document and forward here, what I really want to highlight here is these sections are really geared towards the everyday user, somebody who wants to find out the specific provisions and regulations for their property, or maybe the more technical, maybe consultant, somebody who wants to understand the regulations that might apply to their client's property. But these two sections, both sections 1 and 2, they really guide the reader on how to find out what you need to make an informed decision about your property, or learn a little bit more about your property, right? How to read the maps, how to navigate. Through the public consultation process, we also have online mapping, which is a little bit different than what we've had in the past. We actually haven't had a document that has been in a kind of a digital format, which is exciting for the city of Brantford. We can go in, type in our address, go to our property, find out all the regulations that apply, and use that in tandem with the actual document itself. So I think it's a really exciting time for the city, and this new document really paves the way for that. The other thing I want to highlight throughout the document, we also have these small renderings and graphics that support whether it's a definition or a term that we want to help convey to the public. And so they're scattered throughout the document, and it really modernizes the document because we can get a reference. If we want to look at stacked townhouses, okay, well, give me an example of a stacked townhouse. Okay, we have a small drawing there. This is the layout. This is the orientation from the street, just a high level overview, right? So really good in that sense. Now, to talk about zone categories in a little bit more detail, what I wanted to do was just provide 1 to 2 sentences looking at each of the zones. So we'll start with mixed use, looking at the historic main streets. This includes properties along Colborne and Dalhousie Street in the downtown, generally between Brant Ave and Clarence Street, as well as Victoria Park Square, the Heritage Conservation District. And development within this zone should be in the form of mid to high rise mixed use buildings, looking at 3 to 8 stories. The lower downtown zone, this includes Icom Drive, Market Street South, and Clarence Street. So when we're thinking about that lower downtown bowl, it permits the broadest range of commercial, cultural, entertainment uses and apartment dwellings in mid to high rise, looking at 3 to 24 stories. Then we get to the upper downtown. This permits mixed use development 2 to 8 stories north of the historic Main Street, along Market Street between the downtown transit terminal and the Via Rail Station corridor. Looking at that MCC abbreviation, that's the major commercial zone, to support the development of intensified mixed use and transit support development. At these predominant locations within the city, the major commercial zone permits the broadest range of commercial, office, cultural, entertainment, and community uses along that mid to high rise apartment dwellings, looking at 3 to 18 stories. And then we have the Brant Heritage Conservation District. Some of us may be familiar with that along Brant Ave. So this really aligns with the boundaries of the Heritage Conservation District. This zone is really destined to respect that low-rise heritage characteristic of the district, permits a mix of commercial, restaurant, office, and residential uses up to 3 stories in height. And then the IC zone. So when we talk about the IC zone, we're talking about intensification corridors. Really, we're looking back again to that OP for, the origins of these zones. And these are the connective spines that really permit a broad range of commercial and residential uses in mid to high rise developments. Here we're looking at 3 to 12 stories to support transit and major road linking the downtown and those major commercial centers, which I referenced. So to change gears and look at the residential zones, we start with the suburban residential zone. So this permits single detached dwellings and accessory dwelling units. It's applied to partially serviced and non-serviced areas, which for the most part are already developed on private septic systems, minimum lot area of 4,000 meters. And really this is proposed for addressing septic system requirements. So just to get an idea for those who maybe haven't navigated the online resource, if we're looking at that SR zone, properties along Mount Pleasant, maybe within the Tula Heights area, you're going to see that SR abbreviation and be able to see some of that lot composition. Now, when we talk about the NLR zone, this is existing neighborhood low rise. So this permits single detached and semi-detached dwellings and accessory units within the city's older and established neighborhoods. One of the key pieces here when we're navigating the city's zoning bylaw in text, you're going to see some footnotes that are going to reference lot frontage, lot coverage, and lot area. Now, when you're looking at the map, this is where you're going to really find that useful combination of navigating what you see visually and then understanding the related provisions. So beside the NLR zone, the NLR abbreviation on the map, there's brackets that include an F, a C, and an A. So in looking at that, you're going to see specific lot frontage. So it's going to have a number beside it. Lot coverage, which is C, it's going to have a number beside it, and lot area. When we were looking at how the zoning bylaw would address the number of residential zones, an R1 or an RC, basically what this does is it respects the character of a certain area of the city, but brings forward those additional lot frontage, lot area, and lot coverage at the same time. So then to look at the GNLR, so Greenfield Neighborhood Low Rise, this permits a broader range of low rise housing forms in newer residential areas of the city. So looking at our expansion lands and some of the future block plan areas, we're looking at allowing for various types of townhouses in addition to uses that are also permitted in the neighborhood low rise zone. Then we have the NRC zone, which is neighborhood corridor zone. Permits a mix of mid-rise housing forms, townhouses and apartments, and neighborhood supporting uses, which would include small-scale commercial uses such as convenience stores, restaurants, personal service, childcare, small-scale places of worship as well. Then we move to residential mid-rise. So again, now we're starting to apply that, verbal cue for mid-rise development, and in this we can kind of understand it as mid-rise housing forms, including various types of townhouses and apartment dwellings, and may also include smaller neighborhood supporting uses on the ground floor of mixed-use development. Then we have the residential high-rise, which permits apartment dwellings in buildings over 6 stories in height, and this may include neighborhood supporting uses on the ground floor as well, and also long-term care and retirement homes. Looking at institutional zones, again, aligning with the city's official plan, what we're doing here in the zoning bylaw is really calling these out further. Looking at I-1 specifically, within the city's official plan, institutional uses are permitted in the residential zone on that small scale. So when we're talking about the I-1 zone, this permits that smaller scale institutional use, really again occurring throughout the residential and mixed use designation. So maybe small scale places of worship and elementary schools. The I-2 zone, this is where we talk about that regional, more kind of citywide, the ability to serve the surrounding communities as well. So this is hospitals, post-secondary, and secondary schools as well. Looking at commercial, we have AS, which is automobile service zone. So this permits a range of automobile related uses such as gas stations and repair garages. Then we have the CC, which is convenience commercial zone, permits small scale commercial uses on smaller sites located within the residential neighborhood, such as convenience stores, retail stores, personal service, childcare, as well as apartment dwellings above the ground floor. So NC, we're looking at the neighborhood commercial zone. This really permits a broader range that's intended to serve residential neighborhoods on larger sites. So here we're talking about grocery stores, financial institutions, larger places of worship, office, those types of uses. And then we get into employment, again, referencing it, we're tying back to conformity with the city's official plan. So we're really carrying forward those two land uses. So we're talking about a general employment zone, which is GE, and this permits employment uses that are more industrial in nature and includes outdoor storage. And then we have the PE, which is prestige employment. So this really applies to lands having exposure along Highway 403 and other major roads. And really, this zone is intended to permit development with a higher standard of building design and landscape requirements in conformity with the city's OP. Looking at agriculture, so this zone is a little bit new to us. Provisions for the agricultural zone, these are really modeled after the County of Brant's agricultural zone, as it really best implements the city's official plan policies for rural areas, right? So the zone really, though, when we're looking at the county zoning, it was updated and based on best practice to include things like agritourism uses, accessory residential, bed and breakfast establishments, home occupations, and home industry. Core natural, we've received a lot of good feedback on the core natural zone. And when we're talking about core natural, again, it really implements the core natural area designation of the city's official plan. So as part of the official plan review process, there was a natural heritage study that was done citywide. So that includes the expansion lands. And that's really where this zone gets its origins and formation from. So, we might get comments from residents saying, well, I don't understand why this small sliver of core natural goes through the back portion of my property. I think it should be aligned. This new zone respects the study that was done and really carries that forward. And that's regardless of property boundaries, right? So again, going back to the official plan, that's where it gets its origins from and its foundation. Looking at the open space, it really implements the parks and open space designation of the city's official plan. Permitted uses include, for example, parks, campgrounds, cemeteries, golf courses, and stormwater management facilities. The development zone, this one's also unique, something we've gotten a lot of feedback on, just a lot of questions about how this zone actually works. The proposed development zone really applies to the boundary expansion lands within residential and intensification corridor designations of the city's official plan. So if you're looking on the map, it's actually the brown area to the north and to the south. So that would be the expansion lands north of power line. So that's the 5 block plan areas in there. And then we're also talking about lands to the south within Tula Heights. So Tula Heights West, Tula Heights South, and Tula Heights East. And so these are going to be identified on an interim as development zone. And the development zone is really intended, as I mentioned, to apply on an interim basis, and it permits uses that are basically there today and new agricultural uses, excluding livestock operations, until a block plan process is completed. And the landowners then would move through to rezone the lands to the applicable zones of the new zoning bylaw. So they would be looking to the GNLR zone, right, the Greenfield Neighborhood Low Rise or intensification corridor zone, to really permit those future urban development uses. So that's a detailed overview of the zones. I encourage you to review those. I'm sure a lot of you have. As I mentioned, just kind of looking at the two, this is Schedule A of the city zoning bylaw. And when we're looking at the mapping, the zone categories, really how they're displayed, they're going to show up as an abbreviation on the zone because there's a lot of good information. So this includes mixed use, employment, residential, commercial, and then broken down further into those 22 categories that we just had on the screen. So other than showing some great visual aids that are now available for the city zoning bylaw, I just wanted to share that comparison that I mentioned. So there's the city's official plan. So that's Schedule 3 land use, right? So when we kind of bounce back and forth between the two, we're looking at employment there in purple, or we're looking at the residential. You can see where the origins for those zones come from. And then obviously we have, we obviously have some further delineation or calling out certain zones, whether it's institutional or maybe some of our open space zones that are already permitted within the residential. So that's that light green, right? So then in terms of next steps, as I mentioned, the document was released on December 4th, and that open for public feedback kind of ended last week. Although I'm happy to receive feedback still on the document. We're currently either in the middle of some of our meetings this week, but we are continuing to have meetings with advisory committees and external stakeholders. Then really, I think what we're looking at is taking all the feedback that we've received, reviewing it. It'll be prepared in a comment matrix. So, we'll be able to review the comment and basically provide a response to either how it was addressed or how the document already addresses it. And then as part of this next stage, we'll also be reviewing the site-specific exemptions because they're not included. So we also have gotten a lot of feedback about, okay, well, why wasn't this site-specific carried forward into the new zoning bylaw for my property? And that's not the case. What we're trying to do is figure out where they should still apply, because in certain instances, the new zoning bylaw may already address that site specific. So there's no need to carry it forward. It might be redundant. And then certainly where they need to be carried forward, we'll be working with Paul and his team at SGL to do that. And then, so yeah, we'll be carrying forward and reviewing comments and preparing the comment matrix. And then again, looking to advance, next steps of this process, looking to bring a final draft zoning bylaw to a statutory public meeting in June. So yeah, thanks everybody for listening. I will conclude the presentation there. And again, thank you, Chair and committee members for your time.
Is it appropriate to ask for questions during the presentation? Any questions of the presenter or? Seeing none, I will move along then to items for consideration. May it please have a mover and a seconder to place an item on the floor. Item 4.1, the new zoning bylaw project draft zoning bylaw with a financial impact of none. I have a mover, seconder please, and I've got a hand up, so I'm at Councillor Hunt. Thank you. Okay, any discussion on the motion on the floor, please? I've got a page of questions. Go to it. First of all, I'd like to thank you. I think I paid attention. I was at the Public Information Center number 3, and I have to say, I was very impressed by both the public turnout and, quite frankly, by the turnout from City Council. I think that it shows great interest, that the city's looking at it with great interest. So I commend the staff for doing such a good job on getting it out there. And I'd recommend that be, for something this major, you've got a decent model to grow from. The questions that I've got are sort of broad, but for the existing properties under the current zoning bylaw, so the properties and land uses currently in the city, how many are legal non-conforming to the existing zoning bylaw, and how many will be legal non-conforming in the new zoning bylaw? Where I'm really getting with this is, how many new properties do we have to add as legal non-conforming with the adoption of the new zoning bylaw?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Paul. I don't know if you have any stats on that specifically at this time.
No, and I don't know how many currently are legal non-conforming. In most cases, what we'll be doing is expanding the range of permissions on a property rather than restricting the permissions. In the existing neighborhood low rise, what we're trying to do is make sure we reflect the existing permissions in terms of lot area and frontage and coverage. And that some cases there might be a few that don't quite meet it, but we're trying to maintain that. We've got some comments from the public where we need to make some refinements to make sure that's achieved. But I don't know the exact numbers, but in most cases, particularly like on the mixed use and intensification areas, what we're doing is expanding the permitted uses and expanding the permissions of what you can do rather than any restrictions on what you can do on a property.
Thank you. The next couple of questions are more administrative regarding the new zoning bylaw. And I think I actually heard the answer at the Public Information Center, but just to get it confirmed, is staff reviewing the new zoning bylaw text for continuity within the same text? And also, I noted that there were some capitalized terms used in the new zoning bylaw that, while some of them are very obvious in what they are because they refer to provincial or acts, regulations, or other city bylaws, there are some that aren't obvious, and I was wondering if there was a definition or a note somewhere in the new zoning bylaw that indicated how those capitalized terms were being used.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. So through you, the chair, I think we've gotten some great feedback on definitions, how they're interpreted. I think there's even some words that, you know, from a administrative standpoint or through feedback where we can make sure that they're defined, maybe they're bolded and maybe one or two was missed in terms of linking a definition. So certainly on that end, they will be addressed. Where there isn't a definition, then obviously we would refer to a dictionary, right? And I think that that's outlined in the administrative and user section. But certainly if there are definitions or words that you would like to, you know, have a discussion on or see as feedback, certainly provide that to me and we can look at them in detail.
I think in my read of the bylaw, the new proposed zoning bylaw, I think that definitions appeared pretty comprehensive. I wasn't able to find I wasn't looking with a fine tooth comb, but I was able to read it well. I was just more concerned about a couple of I forgot to write down a specific example of a capitalized, it's capitalized, not bolded in it.
Yes.
And I definitely know what it, but I couldn't figure out what it referred to specifically.
Yes.
I'll look for that and give
No,
see if I can give you
it's good feedback. I think one of the things that we've noted too, even you know, there might be a term like a residential like an additional residential unit versus an additional residential dwelling to make sure that they're consistent so that you're referring to the same thing, right? Even though it might be bolded, you can't find it in the definition. So that linkage and making sure that we're cross-referencing and making sure that that terminology is tight, right?
Yeah, that was my comment referring to someone reviewing it for continuity.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
make certain
certainly
you refer to the same thing with the same real term
Yes.
every time,
appreciate it. Yeah.
which in the long term would make it easier for the public, the development industry and property owners. The next one is I'd like to you to describe how the new zoning bylaw takes into consideration anticipated population densities in the places to grow legislation as they apply to Brantford. And I know that was included in the development of the official plan. But in this regard, how is that similar to, in terms of density management, how is that similar to other zoning bylaws of Ontarian municipalities with similar density targets?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think when we're talking about growth management, we're talking about our official plan and looking at the foundation for that, looking at some of the recent policy changes and the things that apply to us as planners and as a municipality. Maybe one specific example might be the downtown core, right? So we, under official plan policy, would look at the UGC, identify that needs to have 150 persons and jobs per hectare in our downtown core. Now that's a significant change in landscape for our downtown core. So how do we achieve that? And I think one of the things that our new zoning bylaw does is not super prescriptive in terms of densities, but if we're implementing the city's official plan and we're talking about, you know, height permissions and maxes and mins, looking at the lower downtown core and looking at how that area would need to change significantly to accommodate these types of densities, right? 24 stories, whether it's 24 or 26 or 30, I think that looking at best practice and the work that SGL has done, we're seeing those increased heights, right? We're seeing the transformation, talking about intensification corridors. And as Paul had mentioned, allowing for additional heights and additional permitted uses, whether it's, you know, pushing for mixed use and understanding having the new zoning bylaw refers to these PP areas, pedestrian promenade areas, where we want to encourage, you know, ground floor commercial and mixed use above, right? And so additional opportunities for intensification, right? Those types of things.
And in concert with that, how will this trigger, or does it match with the existing master servicing plan from the city and the master transportation plan, or will that trigger additional requirements for city to review those earlier once this zoning bylaw and OP are fully implemented?
I think that's a great question. Another probably ties to growth management. So as the city's official plan process unfolded, as you're aware, or you may not be aware, but there was the transportation master plan and the master servicing plan that were all done together. I think, if we're talking about the expansion lands and understanding what the requirements for servicing are out there, we also need to look at densities and understanding how these processes are going to evolve. So when these block plans come together and they're putting together certain yields, understanding what that means from a servicing standpoint. We also have the infrastructure staging report as part of that process, right? So that does give some guidance. But I think that, yeah, looking at these block plans, looking at them together, whether it's power line east, power line central, or power line west, we have to understand those and understand how densities are going to impact servicing. That's a little bit outside of my realm in planning. Definitely my colleagues in development would be looking at those things and understanding the transportation networks. And that's why I think block planning process is so important, right? Because we get to look at that framework and understand, okay, this is what's being proposed. Is it appropriate? What are the higher arching frameworks? And then get to look at them from a zoning standpoint. Look at where the medium, look at where the high density stuff is going to be. Some of the things that this zoning bylaw is looking to bring forward.
Can I just jump in there? I know you're the chair, so I'm going to go through you through.
Yes.
So Josh, good answer on the specific. So it's a great question, as Josh said. So I think you're referring to the transportation master plan and the master servicing plan in addition to the official plan. So those were done in conjunction. We just met last week, actually, after this meeting. Our senior leadership team meets every Tuesday, and that was on the agenda for Public Works to go back. I mean, so we do have the stuff on the new stuff, like the block plan, as Josh was referring to, for our development engineering, which works in planning. They will review that. But there also is some implications of the zoning bylaw will have on our master servicing plan. So we've asked Public Works to go through the documents and see what implications that may have on the TMP and MSP. So the short answer is yes to your question. We're doing that, but it's a management function on the new stuff that Josh is referencing, but also on the current stuff. Like, so in our meeting a few weeks ago, the area by the old Canadian Tire was referenced, and Colburn and Dalhousie as a pedestrian PP. What was the second thing? Pedestrian
promenade.
Thank you. And I wanted to make sure Public Works was aware of that, because they're looking at putting a traffic circle that'll be coming to a report near you pretty soon. And in the next few months, you'll see a report on that. So they need to be monitoring this report quickly. So yes, the short answer is yes, but it will affect some of it.
Thank you. The only other, and this isn't real, it's an official plan issue, which I don't think is part of this, but just a minor concern. So I'll skip that one.
No. If you don't mind,
Okay.
I would appreciate hearing it.
So in looking at then the in particular the zoning around the Greenfield neighborhood low rise,
right,
being the ability to create a denser residential footprint than the existing neighborhood low rise. Is the city concerned, or is planning concerned at all that essentially we're going to establish on the northern boundary of the city a more dense potentially a more dense neighborhood, and that you're moving from a more dense neighborhood through a less dense neighborhood to get to the downtown core? And potentially then, what are the other things that support the increasing of the density in the rest of the existing zoned areas?
So through the chair, Paul just jumped on, so I think he might want to provide some feedback on that. I'll let him go first.
Yeah, certainly. And that's a really good question. And it's a question that a lot of the municipalities in the Greater Golden Horseshoe are facing. And it's because of the increased densities that the province wants us to achieve. And frankly, we need to achieve because of the housing crisis. And so we have our subdivisions from the 60s and 70s, and they're quite low dense. But so these newer subdivisions, they have to be more dense. We have to build them more compact. And that's just a factor we're going to have. So what you end up having, though, is you have denser new subdivisions on your outer edge, but then you have the dense corridors, your intensification corridors coming down, serving those areas and bringing them into the downtown. Yes, you're going to have lower density subdivisions with additional dwelling units and some infill which we're allowing the infill, then you will get some what more gradual density, infill density in those existing neighborhoods as well. But yes, we're seeing that in cities all over the Greater Golden Horseshoe. These outer rings are going to be more dense than the old 70s and 80s subdivisions.
Yeah, I think that answers the majority of what I had. I have got some things that are very zone specific, which I would like to discuss offline, I think.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Are there anybody, is everybody, yes, Councillor Hunt. So your hand is still up?
Yeah, thank you, and through you to Josh. So I did attend the public meeting last week, which again I'm gonna commend you and staff on what's obviously been a very detailed and well thought out project. My question is kind of along the whole public stakeholder engagement. So I had made a note that there was going to be an opportunity for another public meeting in June, but I don't know if you want to. I was just looking at that kind of last slide in terms of next steps along the process. So am I to understand that that's actually, that public meeting will be the June planning committee meeting? Because then I had a note that there would be the opportunity then for questions to staff for them to address that. And then it was going to be coming to council for approval, which there was also a June date for council approval there. And I just cognizant of the fact that council recesses for the month of July. Some of the questions that I've got from constituents are around, when is this taking place? And more of the concern that we're getting are those, as you said, those existing low-rise neighbors that are now adjacent to an intensification corridor property. Specifically, what we're running into right now are developments that are coming forward under the intensification corridor, but they're directly adjacent to existing residential neighbors who are now very concerned that their beautiful property that's backed onto this largely green large property on, say, Colburn Street, and now they're going to have an apartment building in their backyard. So it's that whole community engagement consultation piece that I just wanted a little bit more clarification on in terms of how we're going to achieve that community engagement and have those questions answered.
Sure. So I'll answer this one. So through the chair to the councillor, really great question on engagement. And ultimately, our goal is to bring a final recommendations report to council in June to adopt the new zoning bylaw. However, we are still undergoing consultation. So while that is our goal, that date could ultimately be pushed back depending on the comments that we continue to receive and whether or not that may be necessary in order to complete all of our engagement. So just to highlight on some of the engagement that is still to come, we will be meeting, we have several more advisory committees of council that we will be meeting with, as well as some additional stakeholder meetings as well, particularly with the Home Builders Association, some follow-up with the Chamber of Commerce. We also have met with our First Nations neighbors and may require additional meetings with them as well. So we have some of that additional engagement to undertake, but we are also planning to meet individually with the ward councillors to not only review the zoning bylaw, but to walk them through the interactive mapping tool, as well as to hear some of, or for staff to present some of the key changes that are proposed in their wards, as well as to hear some of the issues that you're facing individually as councillors in the zoning bylaw. We may be looking at having some additional targeted concept meetings, one around intensification corridors. We're likely looking at some additional consultation for ADUs. So all of that is really ramping up in the next next several months. So while we do intend to bring the zoning bylaw, that is the goal that we're working towards for a statutory hearing in June. We do want to be cognizant that we still are undergoing that engagement, and there's still much more engagement to be done. So if we are not able to make that date, then we will push that to the fall. But ideally, our target is June.
That's great. So thanks for that, Nicole. So I'm very pleased to hear that some targeted discussions with the ward councilors in terms of addressing constituents' specific concerns around areas that are ward specific are planned and very much welcomed. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Last question.
Yes, please.
Question for Chair. The new zoning bylaw, does it impact our current block plan?
So our current block planning process that was rolled out as part of the official plan, I would say no. What the current zoning bylaw does is it really respects that process. And the block plans, the 8 block plans, so we have 5 across the north and 3 down in the Tula Heights area. Those areas are all development zones, so they're in that brown color currently on the zoning bylaw. And really what that interim zone does is it says, okay, this is going to stay here for now. And in order to inform the next step, you need to go through the block planning process, check that box. And then what you're going to do is go through a zoning bylaw amendment process. So you're going to go through and establish all those zones by referencing this document and using the zones that have been created here. So we want you to use this zone as a group or as an individual plan of subdivision process. You're going to go through and do it using this document. So it's really kind of a step process, and this document does allow for that. So it's in conformity, and yes, it doesn't impede that.
Thank you. Any other questions of the committee? Seeing none then. Oh, yes.
Yes, thank you, Chair Simpson, through you to staff. And I raised this concern with staff last week at the public meeting. So this comes out of the whole official plan process. And where we would have landowners, residents, et cetera, saying, well, you didn't tell me what you were doing. And you'd say, well, there was lots of open houses and let's talk Brantford, etc. But I think the problem we have is that people are used to, and they've probably seen it at some point in their lives, where there's been a rezoning application in their neighborhood. And they're used to getting that notice in the mail if they're within 120 meters, and it shows them the lot and what's proposed in terms of the zoning change. And so there's this expectation that any notification that comes from the city to residents will be sort of customized to them and their situation. Right. And so it's kind of created this expectation that that's what'll happen. I know in the official plan, we were getting responses from, well, why didn't you come and tell me what was being planned? And you'd say, well, there was all this public process. Why didn't you, as a resident of the city of Brantford, you've got an obligation to keep yourself informed. Why didn't you take advantage of everything we had? So it was kind of a mismatch between what we're required to do in terms of notice under the Planning Act and what residents expect. And the one key problem with the official plan was someone would say, well, show me the notice you mailed to me that told me this, right? And well, we weren't able to do that. So I'm hoping that we will include a notice in the next property tax bill, because that goes to all landowners, right? Advising them that there is a comprehensive zoning bylaw and that they should, if they're at all concerned, give them like a website to go to. And then my concern is, so you think about that mindset, that person, what they'll want to do is they're going to want to see what's the zoning is for their property, right? And then they want to be able to understand what's proposed for the properties around, and they want to understand what that zoning provision means. And they don't want to go through that.
Sure.
And they won't go through that. So what I'm wondering is, when someone comes on to the website, and I haven't checked it myself, is it set up for that kind of inquiring mind that they first want to see a big map, they want to click on their neighborhood and then click on their lot, and then they'll see a zoning description come up, you know, GL, whatever, and the various abbreviations, but they'll look at that and go, I don't understand what that means. Can they then click on that? Because it could hyperlink them to what that particular prefix means,
Right.
so
So
making it really customer user friendly.
yeah. So what I'll do through the chair, I'll speak to the admin component, like the user function, and then I'll let Nicole maybe speak to some of the ideas around kind of next steps. And so with the online webpage, we've really broken the document down into, okay, this is the text and here are the schedules, but here's the interactive map. So if you want to go to that interactive map, punch in your address, click on your property, come up with a little box and say NLR, this is what my zone is. So the question around, can I get to that component? Yes. Is there opportunity for us to maybe layer it with, well, this is what you're zoned right now, and this is what you're going to be zoned in the proposed zoning bylaw. Maybe look at some of the colors of how people are viewing it and trying to layer some of that information. Those are after the feedback from the task force and the PIC last week, those are the things that we're kind of taking and running with, like the feedback that you're sharing right now, and kind of how can we convey that more effectively and how can we reach a broader audience. So I'll hand the floor to Nicole.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Josh is absolutely right. So we've been having some internal conversations about how we can get the message out there a little bit more. And you know, it is unfortunate that, you know, we're always going to be in that situation of we provided the information, but you know, somebody can always say they didn't look at it. I mean, that's unfortunate. So we are trying to combat that with, as Josh said, we are making some changes to the interactive map. We will be utilizing the full citywide mail out and directing people to really get on and use that interactive map. And then playing around with some mapping that we would like to do, some like sort of full service ads in the Civic News and that kind of thing, really targeting, like, if you are in this area, these are the major changes, please look. And if you're having trouble, to please contact planning staff as well to walk through some of those changes. So we're looking at a variety of those tools to really get the message out and really kind of drive home that there are some changes. But one of the other things that we did sort of highlight is, and Paul mentioned it, is that this zoning bylaw is a lot more permissive than it is restrictive. And so it's that understanding that one of the concerns that we have is sort of taking away of development rights, and we're absolutely not doing that in our zoning bylaw. So really wanting to convey the message that the majority of change will be targeted in those intensification corridors. So if you are backing onto a corridor, this is what this means. As well as utilizing the full city mail out and making some changes to that user-friendly interactive map as well.
Yeah, I hope it's really user-friendly, and I don't think the concern will be that it's too restrictive, but that it's too permissive, right?
Yeah, it's that balance, is sharing that message that there is.
What, you mean in my neighborhood, there can be a boarding house? Like, I mean, I think that's the reaction. You will have from property owners, say builders or developers, they may be concerned about the restrictive nature, but most homeowners and residents will be more concerned about the permissive nature. And so I'm hoping so I used the interactive map last week, and I focused on my own home. It's a good way to start and understand how. And I was quickly able to find the area that I live in, and then, you know, you click on it and up comes up the box that then gives you the zoning description, which I think for mine was RM, was residential medium, and then there was a prefix of numbers after that. The problem with that interactive map is people's natural reaction will be to then click on that.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Hyperlink.
What does that mean? The hyperlink to then what
Yes.
describes
Right.
that particular abbreviation.
Okay.
Yes,
Right.
that's right.
Planners know exactly what that is at a glance because you're so used to it. But people find that very frustrating.
Yeah. Okay.
And if they have to go back into the body of the bylaw to figure out what that is, many of them they won't do it. It's too
We can
hard.
chat with our cartography team and see if we can hyperlink that box to send somebody right to the zoning bylaw to go to that direct section, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just as a clarification, I think what Mayor Davis was looking for is what do the F, the C, and the A, what does F mean? What does CA mean? What does A mean? Because I've used the map the same way, and I remember I had to go back to remind myself what the F, the C, and the A meant.
Certainly.
Yeah, so that, you know, when you see that, you know, I'm in an F9, C whatever, A whatever, it means something, but what did it mean? And I think that the average, I agree with the mayor, definitely the average homeowner or occupant of a property won't spend the time to understand that to the level that perhaps they want to. They would rather just be able to ask, what's changing for my property? That's all they want. And what's changing for the properties around me if they're in on a border zone. And that actually, and you were at the pick, you heard the comments, I think, from a couple of councillors, and I think the public also mentioned similar things. So that was probably the most common bit of feedback at that meeting that I remember.
My last question is, how are you going to deal with, assuming we get a pretty good public intake and people become very interested, such as, let's say, Mr. Harrow from last week, who was the lawyer that lived,
Yes,
right?
Mhm.
yes.
You know, I know him quite well, obviously, but you know, and ideally, we'd like a number of people, a number of residents like him that take an interest and check it all out. But I think they're going to be, if people do that, you're going to have a lot of requests for site-specific exceptions, right? And are we ready for that? That if that becomes something that a lot of residents want, they've got low-density residential or medium, but they want for their neighborhood changes in respect to, you know, setbacks or lot area or whatever. If they're pretty sophisticated, they know what it is to ask for.
Yes.
And to create certain restrictions in the neighborhood. So are we set up to be able to answer those kinds of questions as they flow in, if they
Yeah,
come?
so through the chair, I think in terms of the feedback that we get from homeowners to developers, the question about, I would like to see my site pre-zoned, or I would like to see site-specific provisions, I think that's where we as planners, as municipal staff and various departments, and we get the opportunity to kind of share our outlook as professionals, and through Joe and Nicole and Alan and through their team and our team. Not every situation is going to lend itself to a site specific. There are processes where if it is going to go through a site specific, then that planning process needs to occur so that we can look at it in detail, right? If it's looking at certain densities in certain areas that maybe don't allow for it, although our zoning bylaw is a little bit more permissive, if it's a zoning bylaw amendment process that needs to take place, then we have the proper planning tools in place to allow for that, and understanding that we also have an accelerated development process to look at that, not over a long period of time, but we do have tools in our tool belt to really look at that. So the site specific component, I think it will be interesting to see through this next iteration where some of the site specifics that we have today in our current zoning bylaw are no longer applicable because they're redundant, because maybe the new zoning allows for it, or where we're carrying those forward because they were put in place and we need to respect them, right? So, right.
Lastly, I just wanted to say that you know, I really appreciate the hard work our consultant has done and staff. And this is a formidable task, but the easier we can make it for the average resident to be able to use the interactive map and understand what's in there for their home, their property, and their neighborhood, I think the better the end result will be, and the more people will accept it.
Yeah, great.
Any further questions from committee? So just a reminder then that we have a motion on the floor with two parts. A, that the report on the new zoning bylaw project be received, and B, that any comments from the Planning Advisory Committee be forwarded to staff. So if there are no more comments, I'll call the question then. All those in favor, please show of hands. All were in favor, so it is carried. Moving on then to consent items. Actually, let me just step back. Again, thank you very much to staff. I found the report easy to read. I really did. But I have been following the official plan, and the zoning for some time, so, I kind of feel I'm in the know. But I think for the, I hope that you're getting comments from, the average citizens that are similar, that they enjoyed reading and seeing stuff as well. Moving forward then on the consent items, minutes from the, August 9th, Planning Advisory Committee meeting. Could I get a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes for the August 9th, 2013 meeting? I have a mover, Councillor Hunt, and I have seconded. Are there any errors or omissions? All those in favor then? Any opposed? It's carried. There are no resolutions for this meeting. There are no notice of motions, and therefore our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.